If you're like me, you've watched dozens of videos and read hundreds of articles on global warming, cooling, climate change, whatever the term is these days, and you know that for decades people have been arguing about the accuracy of the temperature records and what it means for the future. I'm going to skip over that for the most part and instead present what I maintain is the rational approach. I'll start by presuming you are familiar with the evidence for evolution, and you are in general agreement that the Earth's landforms and climate have been changing for its entire history due to natural forces. Almost certainly it once looked like this. The early oceans and atmosphere would be toxic to present-day life forms. Now I'm also going to presume you agree that it is possible for man to alter the environment. There, I just changed it a little bit. I replaced some oxygen in the air with some CO2. I'm sure that amount of change is so insignificant as to be lost in the noise. But this amount, clearly not. If you're like me, you've participated in dozens of discussions about whether man's influence is causing the glaciers to melt. Or the sea levels to rise? Are we causing so much change that the life on this planet won't be able to adapt quickly enough? Interdependent and symbiotic species might become so disrupted that a ripple effect throughout the food web might one day cause catastrophic extinctions? Will our pollution or nuclear wars destroy the planet as we know it? Now I have to admit that I'm very skeptical that man's activity is enough to alter the climate, but it might one day, so I'll continue. Would the Earth be better off if our species died out? Well, the next question is, better off for whom? If there aren't any people around to care, do rocks and rivers, plants and animals have rights? I think I've shown in earlier videos that rights can apply only to a species that depends upon reason for survival, which means us. So no, we can own them. In a future video, I'll explain in detail why rights cannot apply to animals of any type, wild or domesticated, or at any stage of development. Should we consider ourselves as just stewards of the planet, not owners? As I've explained in previous videos, ownership of real estate is essential for human flourishing. If I cannot be said to own my plot of land, or jointly own this area with my neighbors and so on, my rights are being violated by those who prevent me. Be sure to give that due consideration. So how much can we safely alter the Earth? What changes that I and my neighbors make are ultimately going to endanger my life and your life? Let's examine a futuristic example. Suppose you lived with a group of scientists here, in a lunar habitat. There is no atmosphere outside. Everything you need for survival is inside. Now suppose there is an ammonia leak from the air conditioning system. The only air you have to breathe is inside. A leak of ammonia could threaten the lives of everyone. The entire crew immediately takes corrective action. It's a matter of survival. Where do we actually live? You can see that I like to keep track of the places I've visited. The Earth's diameter is about 8,000 miles, and the highest that most of us ever fly in the atmosphere is about 9 miles. If you're good at juggling very tiny numbers, you find that on a 1-foot diameter globe such as this, that 9 miles is no thicker than, well, not the paper skin, but the layer of colored ink printed on the paper. From this perspective, I'm at the bottom of this very thin layer. In fact, the deepest spot in the ocean and the highest mountain peak are all contained within this thin layer. Let that sink in. It's no wonder that we feel very protective of our home. Now let's examine what we mean by changing the environment. We're talking about dumping trash, air and water pollution, and we're talking about doing it on such a big scale that global weather patterns are affected, and in turn the ice caps melt and flood the land, and so on. Can we simplify this in some way? I think we can. I think we can say that environmental alterations reduce to two things: taking something someone else wanted and leaving a mess.
For example, pretend I'm drilling for oil. Other people want me to leave that oil where it is, or at least make it last longer.
And now, I'm leaving a mess. Don't worry, I'll get that. Pretend I've just burned down a forest, and now I've left ashes on the ground and smoke and gases in the air. Other people are going to be upset about the mess I've made. It ultimately reduces to these two methods: taking something that someone else wanted and leaving a mess. In the case of burning down a forest, I've done both.
The big concern is that these two methods appear to be uncontrolled. Humans are taking so much out of the earth and leaving such a mess. Well, it's worrying. There doesn't seem to be anything we can do to stop it. It might take a massive effort to make any change for the good, and the usual answer is that we've got to forcibly put more areas off limits to stop people from mining and harvesting, forcibly punish people for leaving a mess, and force them to put things back the way they were. Of course, that means forcing me, and I don't like to be forced.
So where does this occur? I don't cut down all the trees on my land. In fact, I plant them, and I don't leave a mess. I change things, but by my standards, it's an improvement, not a mess.
I don't make a mess in here either. In fact, I spend a lot of time and effort keeping it clean. I'm proud of it. It was a big investment. I'm not going to let it run down.
And this land I jointly own with my neighbors. I'm happy to help keep it tidy because I own a share of it. I'm proud of it. There is pride in ownership. So where do the bad things happen? For the most part, it happens on land that we are forbidden to own. It happens on land and in the ocean and in the atmosphere that government controls and prevents us from owning. This has been known for centuries as the tragedy of the commons. If no one owns it, no one takes care of it. People take all the water before the well runs dry and dump their trash there because, well, there is no owner to complain. And what's the typical solution proposed? More government, more regulations, more taxes. Now, as we all know, air and ocean currents travel all over the world. Once you release some waste product into the ocean or the air, it's eventually going to spread everywhere. And if you release enough of it, sooner or later, everyone is going to be affected.
So any method of stopping it has to apply to everyone all around the world. Many people are convinced that the Earth's climate is changing not just due to natural forces, but due to man's influence. And the only way to stop it is with a one-world government, a political body that has authority over every country. Let's examine the idea of a global government.
I'll make a comparison. The government of a single country is charged with protecting its citizens within the geographic boundary. It must have a police force and law courts to settle disputes within the country, and a military force to defend the country from foreign invaders. It needs buildings and armories and places to practice using weapons and dropping bombs and so on. If you don't like the government of your own country, you can escape from it and move to another.
How would that work for a global government? A global government would essentially have to take over the entire planet. There would have to be no boundaries, and it would have to keep police forces and courts everywhere. Now, suppose this global government became despotic, a dictatorship. Where could I go to escape from it? Another planet? Unfortunately, there aren't any other planets within reach that are suitable for human habitation. This Earth is all we've got. A global government is too risky. It could enslave us all. So I think we have to admit that the concept of a one-world government for our little isolated planet is a bad idea, and probably always will be.
So back to the environment. Clearly there are plenty of examples of people taking things I would prefer be left alone, and plenty of people leaving an unsightly mess. This is the part I find most interesting. In the ideal world, how would we deal with it? I define the ideal world as one with the utmost respect for inalienable rights, one in which every country, particularly my own, seeks to be an absolute and consistent protector of rights.
If you haven't yet watched video number 11, Inalienable Rights and the Ideal Society, I recommend doing that as soon as possible. The remainder of this video builds upon the ideas presented there.
As briefly as possible, those ideas are private ownership of all property, which means roads, parks, lakes, rivers, air, and ocean space, all of it. privatization of all improper government functions, meaning industries and services such as water, gas, and electric utilities, air traffic control, and so on, and conversion of all improper laws to private agreements such as CC&Rs. These agreements would be tailored to maximize our property value and quality of life. Anyone who breaks this agreement can be prosecuted for breach and forced out if necessary, and guests who disregard the rules can be regarded as trespassers and likewise forced out.
So rather than government enforcing its own rules directly by law on unowned real estate and imposing punishment, we take control. We own all the property, we control its use by agreement. We use our own paid guards and other free market solutions to care for our own property. This is a subtle but important distinction. Give yourself plenty of time to think it over.
The extortion racket known as taxation will be converted to voluntary contribution, and there will be no more talk about a carbon tax or any other punishment imposed by government for doing the same things everyone has been doing for decades.
So, in my ideal society, we, the property owners, would insist on cleanliness and restraints on the use of natural resources to the extent we agree to them, not as slaves to the lawmakers, but as sovereign individuals making agreements with our neighbors.
Remember, this is all building upon the concepts I presented in video number 11.
Several questions immediately arise, and I will address these in Part B.